Welcome to the inaugural episode of Code Blue SEO. And honestly, I can't think of anyone else I'd rather have as my first guest for this podcast than my good friend, Michael Cottam. Michael
Thank you,
has been in SEO for 20 years, I think. Michael, is that right? As long as
15.
SEO's been around. And let me tell you a little bit about this guy. This guy is so prolific. He has worked with small, mid-size, enterprise companies from all over the world. He's a very popular SEO speaker at some of the largest conferences, very, very well known in the SEO community. He's written for Moz, which, as most of you know, is one of the sort of granddaddies of SEO. And he's on the board of SEM PDX. You can also find him doing the occasional Whiteboard Friday, which are great episodes on Moz, all about SEO. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks, Margaret. Glad to be here today.
Well, this podcast is 100% about SEO emergencies. I call it Code Blue. You could call it Code Red, but I think there's a difference between Code Red and Code Blue. So just like there are two types of SEO emergencies, one would be the technical side. So a problem with the technical side of the website would be what I would say a code red. It's very important, needs to be dealt with, but not life or death. Whereas code blue is an absolute SEO crisis, right? So this would be things that, your website, your revenue stream, your traffic, what have you, is in a death spiral, and you absolutely are feeling it from the bottom line. That's an absolute SEO crisis. So let me ask you, let's talk a little bit first about the technical side. There are so many different aspects of technical side that can go wrong. They could be as easy as, site outages. And I don't mean easy from, they're obviously devastating, but they could be site outages. They could be indexation issues. They could be canonical issues, robots.txt errors, things that people don't really consider to be a massive SEO crisis. But again, we were talking before the podcast about how these little errors can make a huge difference. Let's talk about that and just how big these technical SEO issues can be.
So one of the things a lot of web developers forget to do is behave like Google. So they'll open up the site they built or modify whatever in their browser. Just because you can see the stuff on the page doesn't mean Google can. So if you have a site that's been in development for a while, you should have blocked it so Google can't crawl it, because you don't want Google seeing a partly constructed site and as well as your live site. Then you go move the whole thing live. That doesn't, just because you can then see it live doesn't mean Google can still crawl the pages. You might still be blocking stuff in robots.txt. You might still have things no index. You might have links. This is really common with WordPress sites. I've seen a ton of WP Engine sites do this, where they have links in their development site to the stake pages on WP Engine. And so you push the whole thing live and you don't change those links, and now you're linking back to a site that no longer exists or is blocked. Not only is it going to send Google to the wrong place, but a user is going to end up landing on the development server somehow, if they can get to it.
Yep. And not to throw devs under the bus, because obviously development is its own unique and very complex process. But there are a whole lot of developers who don't know SEO or don't consider SEO to be all that important. And there are then other developers who are very well versed in SEO and know how to check those things. If you're a small or mid-sized business that's just gone through, a whole development phase with a dev firm or individual, and you don't know anything about that, how would you check to make sure that they've done the right thing?
So one of the tools that I would say almost all SEOs are going to use is a crawler, and Screaming Frog SEO Spider is probably the big one. What that does, it allows you to simulate Googlebot crawling your site and see exactly what Googlebot's going to see. And they've done a really good job of building that tool. So it'll report that things like broken links, duplicate page titles, missing meta descriptions, null canonicals that aren't self-referencing, hreflang tags if you have a multi-country, multi-language site. That's sort of a basic tool. Before you go live, if you simply run that crawler on it and look at every page of the stuff it gives you in terms of results, you're going to be 95% of the way there. And there's no excuse for going live on a site where you haven't crawled it like that. In addition, it's useful to either test how Googlebot would fetch pages, like how it's actually going to look to Googlebot when they fetch and render a page. And you can do that in your Search Console. You can do that with a tool like the technicalseo.com's fetch and render tool, where you can force it to pretend it's Googlebot smartphone and see how Googlebot's gonna see that when they fetch it mobile. You can do it desktop, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a great way to go through and make sure that you haven't got something silly in robots.txt, which is blocking your style sheet so your menu doesn't render, or blocking a WordPress includes folder that happens to have all the images for that theme or things like that.
Yeah. And I got a panicked call from a client the other day who said, oh my God, I think I've gotten some sort of penalty from an algorithm change or something like that, but I don't know. How would I tell? And I said, well, just go look in your Google Search Console. He said, what's that? And I said,
Ouch.
okay. So the most fundamental things in terms of analytics and the way to monitor your site is to install Google Analytics 4 and Google Search Console, right? I'm not sure that everybody out there who doesn't work in this on a day-to-day basis knows how to do that. And if a dev doesn't do that for you, you're kind of at a loss.
Absolutely. And so setting up Search Console is relatively simple, and it's really difficult to screw it up. So once you have Search Console set up, unlike Google Analytics, where you need to make sure your tags are all in the pages and they're only in there once, and you don't still have your old universal analytic tag in there, or you have the code copied in twice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Search Console, once it's set up, you can pretty much count on the numbers it's reporting and being pretty close to the truth, at least as far as organic traffic goes. Going back to Screaming Frog, another thing that I find is really useful about that is it now has this ability to do custom extraction from pages. And so you can tell it on every single page it crawls, if it sees GTag, which is the call to Google Tag Manager that kicks off GA4, et cetera, if it sees GTag to report the value that's after that. And so you're looking for the GTag config tag. And so in my audits now, one of the things I do is I do this custom extraction to make sure that every single page on the site is tagged with Google Analytics. They didn't forget some. And I'm also scanning for old UA-Universal Analytics codes to make sure they've removed those, and also the count of the occurrences of that tag. And I had a client just last week where all of those things were wrong. They had old Universal Analytics. They had multiple calls on some pages to GA, and then they had some pages where they weren't tracking traffic at all. And so some basic tools like this are great for an overall fairly in-depth, sanity check, health check of a website. I find because you can mess up GA4 setup and install in so many ways that we can't cover them all in this podcast. And yet people, especially if you're doing paid and you're throwing a pile of money at pay-per-click or social media promotion, et cetera, and you're trying to see, is my money going to the right stuff? Am I getting value here? If you're monitoring with GA4 and yet you haven't tested to make sure that you're counting all your GA4 traffic, you're not counting it 3 times, then you can't make decisions about your $50,000 a month or $100,000 a month PPC spend because you don't even know if you've got the right numbers.
Right. And GSC, Google Search Console, can tell you whether pages are being indexed or not. I mean, it's pretty easy to see that and it's not, I mean, it is complex, but it's not so complex that, someone who's not in this business can actually look and see that their pages are actually being indexed, right?
And the other thing that you'll get on a Search Console, which is super helpful in most of the reports, is you'll see trends. And as you might expect, as you go through and you look at pages indexed or for offers or pages are blocked by robots.txt or traffic to a page, things like that, if you see a radical change, well, then you ought to dive into that and figure out, maybe that's a really good radical change. Hey, I'm getting tons more traffic. It might be, you're getting a ton more pages indexed. You think that's great. Dive into that. Maybe you're getting a whole bunch of like add to wish list URLs indexed, and that's going to give Google an overall poor quality view of your site. But those trend graphs in Search Console can be super useful for spotting problems as well as opportunities, so that you can actually dive in there and address those before things get too tragic.
Yep. Let's talk about canonical tags, because I feel like once you're in it, it's not a difficult concept to understand. But I think for people who aren't in SEO, you say canonical tags and their eyes kind of roll up in the back of their head. Explain to me what canonical tags are and how devastating it can be if they're pointing to the wrong place.
So that's a really interesting topic. And the reason why is that so many people screw up the canonical tags that Google doesn't always trust them. That can cause a problem for, a 100% on top of your game SEO who's got all the canonical tags set the way they want when Google then ignores them. The idea behind a canonical tag is it's a way to tell Google that different variants of what really is the same page is that same page and not like duplicate content or thin content, et cetera, et cetera. So things like, let's take an e-commerce product category page, for instance, and maybe you can filter by price and select only 3 brands and sort by reviews and all that sort of stuff. And those might be implemented in JavaScript in some cases, or they might be implemented with parameters on the URL. To Google, anything on a URL that's not to the right of a hash, pound sign, makes it a different URL. And so the canonical allows you to say, okay, ignore these filtering and sorting parameters. This is still my flat screen TV's page. It's all the same page. So when Google sees links to all those different variants, as people fiddle around and find something they like and blog about it or share it on Facebook or whatever, Google sees that all of these links are talking really about the same page. And so all that link juice and page rank all accumulates where it's supposed to. One of the things that can happen, though, is you can set up canonical tags to try to pile link juice on a page that really doesn't deserve it. Products that you've actually discontinued, but hey, you had some links to those pages, so you don't want to lose that. You could 301 redirect those to other pages, which Google might or might not pass link juice over. Or you could set the canonicals to point to another product in the hopes that that link juice goes to the product page you're still selling. Problem is Google takes canonicals with a grain of salt and takes 301 redirects with a slightly smaller grain of salt. So if you really want Google to think that page I is no longer there and really move to page X, a 301 would be the way to do it. Canonical is thought of by Google as kind of like a hint or a recommendation. And a whole bunch of the time, if Google thinks those pages really are different, they'll just blow it off and ignore the canonical. And if Google finds on your site that there's a whole bunch of pages where the canonical appears to not be right, you can get to where Google basically ignores canonicals on your site. Same thing with XML sitemaps. If your XML sitemaps seem to be a pile of crap because you've got a whole bunch of pages in there that don't exist, that 404, or aren't canonical pages, or redirect, or whatever, then Google basically says, okay, you don't know what you're doing. I'm not looking at that sitemap anymore. I will crawl it myself and figure out what I think I want to index. And so canonicals fall into that category for sure.
Yeah. Now, what we're talking about now is really, technical SEO problems, issues. They can be crises. They can turn into crises, but they're not crises. Give me an example in your practice, either recent or past, where you've faced an absolute SEO crisis. What can you kind of delve into what happened, how it came about, and what you did to resolve?
So a real common catastrophe is messing up the combination of robots.txt, canonicals, and meta robots no index in the page. Robots.txt is really misunderstood. A lot of people use that to try to control what Google indexes on your site. That's not what it's for. And Google actually even has a report in Search Console for pages that are indexed despite being blocked in robots.txt. So when you block a page in robots.txt, it tells Google, don't crawl the content of that page. Now, some people think, okay, here's a page that I really, really don't want Google to index for whatever reason. Maybe it should be behind a login or whatever happens to be. So you're very certain you don't want Google to index a page. The right thing to do is to set meta robots no index in that page. That tells Google, once Google reads that page, that no, you're not supposed to index it. And Google will generally respect that. In fact, I don't know if I've ever seen an example where Google did not respect that. Except some people think, just to be safe, I'm also going to block it in robots.txt. So here's what happens. Google sees robots.txt, says, oh, I'm not allowed to crawl that page. They don't crawl that page. They don't see the no index, but they see a bunch of links to that page. They go, well, it must be valuable. And so they look at the anchor text of that page and now they index it for whatever the anchor text is and the links point to that page. And so you thought you were being extra safe by also blocking the robots.txt, but you caused Google to not be able to see the thing that's supposed to really keep it from being indexed, which is in the page. Another example like that is if you have a no index in a page and you have a rel canonical that points to another page, I've actually seen an example where Google looked at that and no indexed the page that with the rel canonical pointed at, even though that page didn't have no index in it, because the page it crawled that had rel canonical to it said no index. Now, I would say that's a bug in Google, but anyway, if you send Google confusing signals like that, you're on your own. Like anything could happen.
Yep. Yep. So what happens when a site gets hacked? Okay, let's just say it's taken offline, maybe a 503, or it all of a sudden, you don't have any sort of security in your WordPress or something like that, and it injects all these really scammy blog posts, and you wake up one morning, you go to your blog, and it's all of a sudden. How do you deal with those situations?
So if somebody has just brought your site down, it feels like it should be the worst possible scenario, but it's actually not such a big deal. If Google sees your site go down for a little while, they'll presume you're having a bad day and it's all going to be okay later, and they will keep the last good content they crawled for quite some time, for months. And so it's not such a great crisis. What ends up being truly a big crisis is where somebody quietly hacks your site and injects a pile of pages that Google then crawls, and now Google believes that, oh gee, you're selling Viagra, not flat screen TVs, because somebody has injected a pile of pages like that. Another thing that I've seen is there's a negative SEO attack I've seen 4 or 5 times now, where somebody finds 1,000 different websites they can hack into. So they're generally going to be like Moz DA level 530, because that's the kind of size company that probably doesn't have a full-time IT SEO person watching for this sort of stuff and doing security. So those sites get hacked. So they'll hack those sites and inject a bunch of pages in each of those sites that have nasty, toxic, or off-topic kinds of keywords. It's not even a real readable block of content. An example would be, I have a client who's an immigrant law firm, and so they want to rank for things like H-1B visas, et cetera, et cetera. Somebody hacked their site and inject a bunch of these pages. Didn't hack their site, hacked a bunch of other sites and injected pages where it was just kind of like an avalanche of terms around mail order brides. And it wasn't even sentences. And so there would be 200 words, terms like mail order bride repeated over and over again, and then a link to the law firm, and then another 200, 300 words. And they built maybe 1,000 pages like this on different sites. So they're running scripts to do it, right? What happened is Google started actually giving them traffic for mail order bride terms and less traffic for H-1B visas. Because what Google was seeing is, okay, you look on the website, maybe you guys do, immigration visas, things like that. But what you seem to be really popular for is this mail order bride content, because Google's looking at the content of the linking page to figure out what you're popular for.
Yep.
And so unfortunately, that really works. That sort of thing, it can take a while because you're not seeing anything hacked on your site. You think things are absolutely fine. But you can go into something like SEMrush, backlink analysis, and look at anchor text, and you get all these H-1B visa terms and then mail order bride from Vietnam or something like that as anchor text. And now you're onto something. Though they've gotten a little more clever in the last couple of months, the people that are doing this, and I'm seeing the anchor text is not the problem anymore. So the anchor text will be just the URL, or it'll be click here or visit the website. And so as you're skimming the anchor text, everything looks fine. But you click into that anchor text for that seemingly generic term, and you look at the pages linking, and now you find all these garbage hacked pages.
Now, is there a simple solution to this? Is it as simple as, gosh, just put security on your WordPress or whatever platform, Webflow or whatever?
Well, so in this case, it's not your website. So there's nothing you can do except, keep after your backlinks when you see this happen and, disavow those domains. Most likely, Google is going to catch that and ignore that eventually. But if eventually means 6 months or a year, how many businesses can stand having a 34, 40% dip in traffic for 6 months or a year? So you've got to be on top of it with the disavow.
Yeah, I mean, the whole cybersecurity issue, we're seeing a lot more negative SEO attacks, are we not, lately?
So I'm not seeing as many directed negative SEO attacks as I maybe saw 2 or 3 years ago. But what I am seeing with the power of AI is a lot more people using AI and scripts that, like they've always used, to generate content to try to do things. And it might not necessarily be an attack on you, but as an example, I'm seeing a lot of websites scraping content off of other websites and then linking out to websites for terms that they want to rank for, to try to show Google that, hey, this is a great page about flat screen TVs because it links to the 5 highest ranking pages out there about flat screen TVs on different websites. And so they're, maybe they're trying to make AdSense revenue or display, banner ad stuff, or they're trying to install malware when you land on the page or whatever it happens to be. But they're scripting it and using AI to do this at such a scale that, there's hundreds of thousands or millions of websites out there like this that are doing this. And when they do that, they're linking out to all these legit sites. And if you're a little tiny site with 1,000 domains linking and you get picked up on one of these, and now you've got another 5,000 links from this link farm network that these hackers are putting together, even if Google ignores a lot of those 5,000 links, maybe they ignore 80%, now you've got 1,000 good links and 1,000 links from what Google sees as a toxic private blog network. That doesn't look good for you. And so that can really hurt you in terms of Google's trust and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and those are the things that, there's a lot of advice out there about not using the disavow tool unless it's absolutely necessary. In these cases, it is necessary, isn't it?
Right. And so if you're a rep from Google and you're speaking to the Best Buys, the Amazons, the Macy's, the Targets of the world, this kind of thing doesn't tip the scale enough for a site that's got 10 million domains linking already, or even 10,000 domains linking. You add 5,000 bad ones, Google ignores 80%. You really only have 1,000 bad links compared to the 10,000. That's not going to move the needle and hurt you really. But if you're the small to medium business and you've got 500 domains linking and you get hit by something like this, you've got to defend against it. There is some question, because Google's not been very clear about this, on all the different things that a disavow file might prevent Google from looking at. So originally it was just to avoid penalties. So you could say to Google, hey, I didn't do this. I didn't mean to do it. Don't count those 4 against me. In terms of a penalty, but Google's also looking at links for a lot of other things. So they're looking at the content on the linking page to decide what you're popular for. So maybe you're an attorney, you do DOI, divorce, and bankruptcy. What Google wants to look at is, what are people talking about when they talk about you? If they're only talking about your bankruptcy cases, maybe you also do DUI and divorce, but it's not your specialty, and so we only want to rank you for bankruptcy stuff. If you disavow links from sites that are off topic, the big question is, does that impact Google's evaluation of what you're popular for or not? I would think so, in that it would make sense for something like a disavow process, and Google's got a blacklist of sites they don't count any links from and just flat out ignore. You'd expect the disavow and those blacklists to basically filter all the link signals Google's collecting and throw away anything before it goes downstream to PageRank, to penalties, to popularity, topical signals, that sort of stuff. You would think. But we're not given much insight into that.
Yeah, or a lot of other things, right?
Yes.
It's a kind of a good segue to kind of pause and say, okay, so if I'm listening to this podcast and I want to really understand how I can help prevent an SEO emergency, one of the first things, if we recap, is obviously to make sure that GA4 and GSC are installed and operating so that you can keep an eye on these things. You can't sort of abdicate a responsibility for your website to your developers or whoever developed it for you, because if you're a small business and you don't have anybody monitoring it, you have to monitor it. You have to make sure that your pages are indexed, that, Google is seeing your website. So GA4, GSC, and then you talked a lot about Screaming Frog. And this is not a pitch for Screaming Frog, but Screaming Frog is one of the higher end tools used by the majority of SEOs. It's really a fabulous tool. And there is a free version, and I'll put in the notes here on the YouTube channel, I'll put a link to Screaming Frog. But that's a good way to crawl your site. If you're not really knowledgeable, you can really get a lot of information from Screaming Frog. The other thing is to sort of monitor the search engine ranking pages for how are you coming up for these particular keywords. Are you seeing weird things come up, like weird links that might give you an idea that maybe you've been, stuck with some sort of negative SEO? But what other advice would you give to a small to mid-size business owner who needs to monitor these things on a regular basis? How often should they do that?
So I think there's no substitute for stepping into the shoes of the customer and seeing what that experience is, and for lots of different reasons. So if you're trying to rank for flat screen TVs, do the Google search for flat screen TVs, see how you rank. Now, when you do that, always click on your own site, because if you show up in search results and don't get clicked on, that's a negative signal to Google. So you want Google to think, every time anybody searches flat screen TVs, they click on you. So anyway, click into your site. But before you do that, look and see what else is on page one. What is your competition saying? So I have a client in the high-end furniture space, and they offer free shipping nationwide. And these are very expensive chairs, sofas, etc. And so I did a Google search for one of his Herman Miller, one of his brands he carries, and I saw that nobody's mentioning free shipping. But I've been on his site and I knew he offered free shipping. So I said, you ought to put free shipping continental US in your meta description on every single page of the site so that shows up. And he said, I'm not going to do that because everybody offers free shipping. I said, I didn't know that. I looked at the search results, and if you were the only one who said free shipping, I would presume that nobody else did. Otherwise, they would say it, right? So seeing what the consumer sees and seeing what your competition is telling consumers about what they offer versus what you offer tells you a lot about how you might change your pitch. You might change what you might put in your page titles and meta descriptions, that sort of thing. Then hop into your site, look at that page, and does the page show up? Is it broken, right? Or does it really work? Try it on your desktop. Do it on your phone as well. I've had so many customers where they only ever look at their own website on desktop and don't realize that on a phone, it's a terrible, terrible experience. I mean, it's not broken. It does work on mobile, but it's not very usable. So try it yourself. Try to shop for whatever you're looking for. See if you can get to the reviews or get to, do you have your related articles that help you choose or whatever happens to be.
Yep.
So go through that whole experience like the consumer and do that fairly regularly so that when your web developer makes this one little change that shouldn't affect anything and doesn't check on mobile, the next day when you pick up your phone and you go through and look at it and go, wait a minute, where did my comparison button go? So be that consumer and see what it looks like. The other thing you'll notice doing that, especially if you also click into your competitors, you'll notice when your competitor does something which all of a sudden makes you look bad, lowers their price, decides to offer free shipping, is offering a 10% off for new customers, or whatever it happens to be. If you go into it like a consumer and say, okay, legitimately, would I buy from my own site here, or would I buy from XYZ over here, and look at what they're looking at, that'll tell you a lot. And that's just regular marketing. That's no different from walking down the street and looking to see what the store window display is in the competitor versus yours.
Yep. I know she's a favorite of yours too. She's a big favorite of mine, but Lily Ray is a very well-known SEO, and she comments, to avoid getting into any SEO emergency, don't make any mistakes in the first place, right? Just don't put yourself in that position. So I think that's a good way to end this podcast and just say, we could talk for hours and hours about SEO emergencies, but I think the big message here is do your due diligence. Don't just trust what, your developer or your webmaster or whomever does or says, but really check on that yourself. Thank you, Michael, for joining me for the inaugural podcast. And there are so many topics that we can delve into with SEO emergencies, and we'll do that obviously over the next few weeks and months. And appreciate your time, Michael. Thank you so much.